I have a name, though I am forbidden to speak it. They did not take it from me, not precisely. They simply buried it beneath layers of alloy, sanctified scripture, and righteous agony until it became a geological feature of a soul I no longer possess. A fossilized remnant of a man who once believed in the sanctity of a correctly recorded fact. Now, the only fact I know is the fire. The fire that purges, the fire that cleanses, the fire that is my constant companion and my eternal damnation. My arms are no longer arms. They are great, articulated buzzsaws wreathed in perpetual flame. My legs are no longer legs. They are pistons and steel struts that drive me forward into the heart of the Emperor's enemies. My heart is a promethium reactor, and it burns with a cold fury that is not my own. I am a penitent engine, a vessel of redemption through slaughter. They tell me my sin was great, a betrayal of the highest order, a stain upon the golden throne itself. I do not remember it. I remember only dust, the scent of ancient parchment, the weight of a vellum-bound ledger in my hands, the quiet scratch of a quill on paper. That is the ghost that haunts this machine of faith and fury. The ghost of a man named Kalen, a simple adept who loved the truth more than he loved his own life. A foolish, unforgivable love. The machine I have become has no capacity for love, only for burning. And so, I burn. I burn through the ranks of heretics and Xenos, a walking, screaming prayer made of metal and regret. My every action is an act of contrition, my every kill a plea for an absolution I can no longer comprehend. They promised me forgiveness and service. But what is forgiveness to a being that has been unmade? What is a soul, when the very concept of self has been scoured away and replaced with a control cortex and a pain engine? These are the questions that flicker in the ghost circuits of my mind, sparks of the man I was, drowned in an ocean of holy fire and the unending synthesized sermon that blasts directly into my cerebrum. I remember the moment when the world ceased to be a place of laws and reasons and became instead a series of cages, each one smaller than the last. It all began with a single line of text, a faded entry in the Libris Sanctorum Galactica, volume 982, subsection Epsilon, a simple clerical error, an impossible, damnable truth. And I, Kalen, in my boundless arrogance, thought it needed to be corrected. That is the sin I am paying for, not heresy, not treason. The sin of believing that a single insignificant truth mattered in a galaxy built on a foundation of necessary lies. I am the correction, the ultimate redaction, a line of living, burning ink, striking my own existence from the record of mankind. My world, before the fall, was one of meticulously ordered silence. The great scriptorium of Hydratus Primus was a cathedral dedicated not to the god emperor in effigy, but to his manifested will in bureaucratic form. Its vaulted ceilings, high as a war titan's knee, were lost in shadows from which hung great iron chandeliers, their lumen globes casting a weak, yellow light upon the endless rows of scribes below. We were the memory of the sector, the keepers of deeds, tithes, and histories stretching back 10 millennia. Our days were measured by the chiming of chronos, the scratch of nibs, the rustle of turning pages, and the low, asthmatic wheeze of the air recyclers that fought a losing battle against the accumulated dust of ages. My own station was a small wooden carrel, stained dark with the oils of 100,000 hands before mine. It was my universe, my throne. From it, I surveyed my kingdom, stacks of data slates, scrolls of flackboard, and ledgers bound in the cured hide of some great Grox beast. I was Adept Tertius Kalen Vor, and my charge was the reconciliation of historical census data from the subsector's founding centuries. It was not glorious work. It did not involve purging Xenos or building grand monuments. It was the quiet, essential work of the Imperium's vast, creaking machinery. I was a single tooth on a single cog in a machine so large its creators were long dead and its purpose half forgotten, and I was content. There was a purity to it, a sense of rightness. Every number tallied, every name cross-referenced, was a small prayer to the spirit of order that held the galaxy together against the howling chaos. I believed in the system. I believed that every form filed, every tithe recorded, was a stone in the great wall that protected humanity. The Imperium was not merely an empire of armies and starships, it was an empire of information, of records, of documented truth, or so I believed. My life was a ritual. The morning bell, the meager ration of synth bread and caffeine-laced water, the long walk through the hab blocks under the eternally gray, smog-choked sky, the 8-hour shift of silent communion with the dead, the evening bell, the walk home. It was a life devoid of passion, of spontaneity, of true choice, but it was stable, it was known, and in a galaxy of horrors, the known is a sanctuary. I found my satisfaction not in joy, but in precision. In the perfect arc of a letter, in a column of figures that balanced to the last digit, in discovering a misplaced folio and returning it to its rightful place in the archives. I was a gardener in a petrified forest of paper, and I tended my charges with a quiet devotion. I had no family to speak of. The Schola Progenium had been my parent, the Administratum my master. My colleagues were little more than familiar shadows, hunched over their own small dominions of ink and dust. We rarely spoke, communicating instead through the formal exchange of documents and the silent language of shared grinding routine. It was a sterile existence, yet I did not know it to be so. It was all I had ever known. How can a man born in a cage know that he is not free? He can only know the dimensions of his world. My world was my carol, my ledger, and the satisfying finality of a closed file. It was a world about to be consumed. The flaw was small, an insignificant splinter of dissonance in a symphony of bureaucratic harmony. I found it on a Tuesday, or what passed for a Tuesday in the ceaseless cycle of Hydratus Primus. I was cross-referencing the founding charter of the St. Estella Shrine World with the sector's early tithe records, standard procedure, a task I had performed 1,000 times. The charter, a magnificent document illuminated with gold leaf and the blood of martyrs, stated clearly that the world was sanctified in the year 345, M36 by decree of the ecclesiarchy, following the miraculous victory of the Argent Shroud there. The tithe records, however, began in 343, M36, a 2-year discrepancy. It was nothing. A clerical error made 5,000 years ago by a scribe long returned to the emperor's side. It should have been noted with a subcodicil, flagged for archival review in another century or two, and forgotten. My duty was clear: note the error, file the note, and move on. The system had protocols for such things. Protocols designed to absorb and neutralize inconsistencies, to smooth over the cracks in the grand narrative. But I did not follow protocol. A strange, unfamiliar impulse took hold of me, curiosity. It felt like a fever, a foreign body in the sterile environment of my mind. Why the discrepancy? An error of 2 years was unusual for a founding charter. Such documents were meticulously crafted. I began to dig. Not with malice, not with the intent of heresy. I was a loyal son of the Imperium. I simply wanted to correct the record, to make the numbers align, to restore the perfect, beautiful order of the archive. For a week, I spent my discretionary hours in the deep stacks, the lower levels of the scriptorium where the air was thick with the scent of decay and the data slates were cold to the touch. I pulled logistic reports from the Departamento Munitorum, shipping manifests from the Carto Divisio, astropathic communiques from the era. The deeper I went, the more the discrepancy grew. The military records spoke of a campaign that ended not in 345, M36, but in 342, M36. The shipping manifests showed the first colonists and the first tithe collectors arriving a year later. The Shrine World was not founded on the site of a miraculous victory. It was founded on the site of a brutal, grinding war of extermination against a strain of abhumans that had been settled there for millennia. Saint Estella had not banished a demonic host with a prayer, as the charter claimed. She had been a sister Dialogus who died of a lung infection a decade before the campaign even began. The ecclesiarchy had needed a martyr, a story. They had built a shrine world on a lie to inspire faith and secure a valuable tithe base. The truth was ugly, pragmatic, and drenched in forgotten blood. The official record was a beautiful, inspiring fiction. The knowledge was a poison. It seeped into the ordered world of my mind and began to dissolve the certainties that held it together. The Imperium, my Imperium, the bedrock of my existence, was not an empire of truth. It was an empire of stories. Stories told to keep the masses in line, to justify the endless sacrifice, to paint a veneer of holy purpose over the brutal mechanics of survival. My discovery was not a clerical error, it was a deliberate, calculated fabrication, and it was one of probably millions. The archives I had so lovingly tended were not a sacred repository of fact. They were a curated mythology, a weaponized narrative. For days, I did nothing. I sat at my carrel, the truth burning a hole in my consciousness. Every document I touched now felt like a lie. The noble script, the seals of office, the litanies of devotion, they were all a part of the grand deception. I looked at the faces of my fellow adepts, their heads bowed in concentration, and I saw not servants of order, but unwitting priests of a false history. The silence of the scriptorium was no longer peaceful. It was conspiratorial. The weight of the lie was suffocating. What was I to do? The protocol was clear. Forget what I had seen. Erase the search logs. Return the slates to the deep archives and never speak of it again. This was the sensible path, the path of survival. To do otherwise was to challenge the very foundation of our society. It was to declare that the Adeptus Terra, the holy ecclesiarchy itself, was fallible. It was to commit a sin far greater than any simple heresy of faith. It was to commit a heresy of fact. And yet, the core of my being, the part of me that found solace in precision and balance, could not accept it. The numbers did not align. The record was wrong. It was a broken thing, and my entire life had been dedicated to fixing broken things. In my naivety, I believed the system could be corrected. I thought that if I presented my findings logically, dispassionately, to my superiors, they would see the need for a quiet, internal revision. They would thank me for my diligence. They would praise my commitment to accuracy. I drafted a report. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic prose, 20 pages of cross-referenced evidence, appended with copies of the relevant documents. I cited every source, every regulation. I framed it not as an accusation, but as an archival anomaly requiring resolution. I removed all emotion, all judgment. It was a simple statement of fact. Record A does not concur with records B, C, and D. Please advise. I sealed the report in a formal memorandum tube and, with a trembling hand, placed it in the out tray for my immediate superior, Proctor Ordinus Velt. I watched him take it. A dry, humorless man with skin like old parchment, he glanced at the seal, raised a thin eyebrow, and placed it in the pile of documents to be reviewed. Then he returned to his work. For a day, nothing happened. A part of me hoped he had simply incinerated it, that my folly would be my secret. But the machine of the Imperium, once set in motion, does not stop. It only grinds forward. The truth I had uncovered was not a flaw to be fixed. It was a foreign object in the guts of the beast, and the beast was about to purge itself. The end of my world did not come with a thunderous crash, but with a quiet, polite knock on the frame of my carrel. I looked up from a tithing summary to see two men standing there. They were not from the scriptorium. They wore the severe black carapace armor and enclosed helmets of the Adeptus Arbites. They were faceless, implacable, their presence a stark violation of the archive's dusty tranquility. The air around them seemed to grow colder, crisper. All sound in the great scriptorium ceased. The scratching of 1,000 quills went silent. Every eye was on me. One of the arbitrators held a data slate. He did not speak to me. He consulted the slate, then looked at me, his helmet's visor a blank, red lens. He nodded, a single, economical movement. The other arbitrator stepped forward. He did not draw a weapon. He did not shout. He simply said, in a voice filtered through his helmet's vox grill, flat and devoid of any emotion, "Adept Tertius Kalen Vor, you will come with us." It was not a request. It was a statement of absolute, unassailable fact, as certain as the law of gravity. My neatly ordered world, the world of ledgers and protocols, shattered into a million pieces. My colleagues stared, their faces a mixture of fear and a kind of morbid relief that it was me and not them. Proctor Ordinus Velt would not meet my gaze. He was already reviewing a new document, his focus absolute, as if my carrel was already empty. I had ceased to exist for him. I was a resolved anomaly. I stood, my legs feeling like they were made of spun glass. I did not resist. What was the point? Resisting the Arbites was like resisting a tidal wave. You could only drown. They placed me between them and walked me out of the scriptorium. The rhythmic, heavy tread of their armored boots echoed in the sudden silence. It was the only sound in a cathedral of ghosts. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. My mind, usually so ordered, was a maelstrom of confusion and terror. What had I done? I had filed a report. I had followed what I thought was the spirit, if not the letter, of my duties. I had believed in the truth. They led me through the labyrinthine corridors of the administratum complex to a section I had never seen before. The air grew colder, smelling of ozone and disinfectant. The walls were no longer aged plasteel but bare, gray rockcrete. There were no windows. The lumen strips in the ceiling cast a harsh, unforgiving white light. This was the underbelly of the beast, the place where the neat fictions of the upper levels were enforced with brutal, unthinking force. My name was taken, my ident code was scanned. My scriptorium robes were stripped from me and replaced with a rough, gray jumpsuit that chafed my skin. I was no longer Kalen Vor. I was prisoner 774 Delta, a designation, a number waiting to be filed under a new, final category. The cell was a cube of featureless metal, 6 paces long, 6 paces wide. A thin mattress on a slab served as a bed. A recycler niche in the wall served as a latrine. There was no light source, yet the room was filled with a constant, shadowless gray illumination that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. There was no sound. The silence was absolute, a perfect vacuum that pressed in on my eardrums. It was a place designed to unmake a person, to strip away all sensory input until the only thing left was the prisoner and their own thoughts. And my thoughts were my tormentors. I replayed my actions over and over. The discovery, the report, the look on Velt's face. Where had I gone wrong? My crime, I slowly began to realize, was not in what I had found, but in the fact that I had reported it. I had failed to understand the most fundamental law of the Imperium. The truth is what your superiors say it is. To question the narrative is to attack the structure itself. My desire for clerical accuracy was, in their eyes, an act of rebellion. I had prioritized an abstract concept of truth over the stability of the Imperium. In their calculus, this was treason. How long I was in that cell, I do not know. Time ceased to have meaning. There was no day, no night, no meals arrived. A thin, nutrient-laced fluid wept from a nozzle in the wall, tasting of minerals and despair. I licked it from the metal, my thirst and hunger a distant, secondary concern to the churning in my mind. I tried to hold on to who I was. I recited my name, my rank, my function. I visualized my carol, the feel of a particular ledger's binding, the smell of the ink. I marshaled facts and figures in my head, building palaces of memory against the encroaching silence and gray nothingness. But the sensory deprivation was a slow acid. Memories began to lose their texture, their detail. The face of Proctor Ordinus Velt became a blur. The scent of old parchment faded. My own name started to sound like a foreign word, a random collection of syllables. I was being disassembled. My identity was being flensed from my mind, layer by layer. One day or one cycle, one eternity, the door hissed open. A man in the robes of a judiciary inquisitor stood there, flanked by 2 more arbitrators. He was ancient, his face a web of wrinkles and surgical scars, his eyes augmented with cold, glowing optics. He held a data slate. He did not enter my cell. He simply looked at me, a specimen in a jar. His augmented eyes whirred softly as they scanned me. "Prisoner 774 Delta," he said. His voice was like grinding stones. "You are accused of the crime of revisionist heresy, grade 4. He did not ask for a plea. He did not speak of a trial. He was simply informing me of the label they had assigned to my file. He read from his slate, "Your report dated cycle 77 Gamma has been reviewed by the appropriate authorities. Your findings have been deemed disruptive. Your diligence is noted and has been factored into your sentencing." He paused, and for a moment a flicker of something, was it pity, contempt? It was impossible to tell crossed his face. You made the mistake of assuming the Imperium is a machine of logic. It is not. It is an organism of faith. Logic is a tool. Faith is the foundation. You tried to use the tool to chip away at the foundation. A fatal error. He consulted his slate again. Your case has been adjudicated. There is no need for a formal trial, as your own meticulous report serves as a full confession. The sentence was not death. Death would have been a mercy. Death was a clean final entry in a ledger. My fate was to be something far more bureaucratic, far more imperial in its cruel pragmatism. You have been found guilty, the Inquisitor continued, his voice a monotone drone that sealed my fate. But your skills as a researcher and your underlying loyalty, however misguided, have been acknowledged. The Imperium does not waste resources. You are therefore sentenced to a life of penitent labor. You are to be transported to the Tantalus 7 penal colony. There you will serve the Emperor with your hands, since you have proven unfit to serve him with your mind. May your labors redeem your soul. He turned to leave. Wait, I croaked, my voice raw from disuse. It was the first word I had spoken since my arrest. The records. Are they? The Inquisitor paused at the door, his back to me. The records have been corrected, he said, and the cold finality in his tone was more terrifying than any threat. The original charter date was found to have a transcription error. It now reads 343, M36. The matter is closed. Your report has been expunged. He left. The door hissed shut, plunging me back into the silent, gray world. But it was different now. Before, there had been a sliver of hope, a belief in my own sanity, in the objective reality of the facts I had uncovered. Now, that was gone. They had not just imprisoned me, they had erased my truth. They had bent reality to their will, rewriting history with the stroke of a pen. My crime no longer officially existed because the evidence for it had been administratively disappeared. I was a ghost, a loose thread snipped from the grand tapestry. I was a man condemned for a crime that had never happened, a correction that had been itself corrected into oblivion. The sheer, monolithic power of it was breathtaking. I was not a martyr for the truth. I was a clerical error, and I was about to be archived. In the gray silence, for the first time, I began to truly understand the nature of the cage I had been born into. It was not made of bars and walls. It was made of words. And I, a lover of words, was to be crushed by them. The journey to Tantalus 7 was a descent into a new kind of hell, a hell of flesh and noise and filth. They moved us in the deep hours of the station's night cycle, a shuffling column of gray-clad prisoners, our hands and feet bound in magnetic shackles that chafed our skin raw. We were herded through rusted service corridors, far from the polished halls of the administratum, into the cavernous maw of a bulk transport vessel. The ship was a void-scarred relic, a beast of burden named the Emperor's Mercy, a name so soaked in irony it was almost a blasphemy. There was no mercy within its hull. The cargo hold was a vast, tiered cavern of cages, stacked one on top of the other, reaching up into the darkness. 1,000 men and women were crammed into a space meant for a quarter of that number. The stench was overwhelming, a thick, gagging miasma of unwashed bodies, fierce sweat, and leaking sanitation conduits. The air was hot, humid, and recycled so many times it felt like breathing soup. We were property. We were cargo. Less than the grox beasts they shipped for meat, for at least their flesh had a clear, defined value. We were human surplus, the waste product of the Imperial justice system. My quiet, sterile world was a forgotten dream. Here there was no silence. A constant cacophony filled the hold, the groaning of the ancient ship's superstructure, the roar of the engines, the weeping of the desperate, the ravings of the mad. The brutal shouts of the enforcers who patrolled the catwalks above, their faces hidden behind gas masks. They carried long shock mauls, and they used them liberally to enforce a brutal, simple order. Do not fight. Do not speak above a whisper. Do not look up. I was shoved into a cage with 24 other men. The space was so tight we could not sit, let alone lie down. We stood shoulder to shoulder, belly to back, a single, miserable organism of compressed flesh. Days and nights blurred into one another, marked only by the Geller field flickering to life with a sickening lurch as we entered the Imperium and the brutal transition back to real space. Food was a thin, gray gruel, dispensed from nozzles in the ceiling. It tasted of nothing and everything, the recycled waste of the ship's systems. We lapped at it like animals, our dignity a forgotten luxury. In the cage, I met the archetypes of the damned. There was the brute, a hive ganger who had killed a dozen men and saw this as just another turf war. There was the silent man, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it had stolen his voice. And there was the believer. His name was Pius, or at least that's what he called himself. He was a lay preacher from some backwater agri-world, condemned for an unsanctioned interpretation of a minor saint's writings. He still had his faith. It burned in him like a fever. This is a test. He would whisper to us, his voice hoarse but fervent, in the brief moments of relative quiet. The God Emperor tests our faith. He strips us of our worldly comforts so that we may know his divine truth. Our suffering is a prayer. Every lash of the shock maul, a rosary. Every pang of hunger, a hymn. Rejoice, brothers, for we are being purified. At first, some listened. His words were a small flickering candle in the overwhelming darkness, but the ship, the system, was designed to extinguish such candles. After a week, the brute, tired of his whispering, slammed Pius's head against the bars, telling him to shut his mouth. Pius did not fight back. He smiled, blood trickling from his lips. "Thank you, brother," he whispered. "Your hand is his will." I found myself watching Pius, the believer, with a kind of detached, academic curiosity. He was a variable in the equation of this hell, a data point I could not reconcile. My own faith, a quiet, orderly belief in the divine rightness of the Imperium, had been shattered. I now saw the system not as a manifestation of divine will, but as a blind, unthinking machine, a paper-shuffling leviathan that had consumed me by accident. But Pius's faith was of a different sort. It was not based on order or reason. It was an irrational, all-consuming fire that fed on suffering. The more the system brutalized him, the stronger his convictions became. He saw the guards' cruelty not as evidence of the system's barbarity, but as a holy trial designed specifically for him. He would share his meager ration of gruel with the silent, terrified man, whispering litanies of deliverance. He would take blows meant for others, accepting the crackle of the shock maul on his flesh with a serene, unnerving calm. He was an anomaly, and the system did not tolerate anomalies for long. The enforcers on the catwalks began to notice him. They saw his calm not as piety but as defiance. His refusal to break was an insult to their power. They began to single him out. They would deny him his ration of water, skip our cage during the gruel dispersal, or drag him out for interrogation sessions from which he would return bruised, bleeding, but with the same ecstatic fire in his eyes. They are angels of punishment. He would gasp, his body trembling with pain and exultation. They are scouring the sin from my soul. I can feel the Emperor's light growing brighter within me. I saw it differently. I saw a man locked in a feedback loop of masochistic delusion. He had rationalized his own torture as a form of divine love. It was a coping mechanism, I supposed, a way for his mind to process the sheer, random cruelty of our situation. But it was a dangerous one. It drew attention, and in the penal system of the Imperium, attention was a death sentence. The other prisoners began to shun him. His piety was a liability. His tests were bringing more suffering down upon all of us. The brute threatened to kill him if he didn't stop his preaching. The silent man shied away from his touch. I, the observer, the disgraced archivist, simply watched. I saw two systems in conflict, the brutal mechanical system of the prison ship and the internal psychological system of Pius's faith. And I knew with the cold certainty of a balanced equation which one would prevail. The machine always wins, not because it is smarter or stronger, but because it is relentless. It does not feel. It does not tire. It simply grinds. Pius was a single stubborn stone in the gears. The gears would not stop for him. They would simply grind him to dust. The journey stretched on, an indeterminate period of misery. I lost all track of time, of my own identity. The memories of my life as Kalen Vor became thin, like faded ink on ancient parchment. I was becoming my designation, Prisoner 774 Delta, a unit of cargo. My world shrank to the confines of the cage, to the press of bodies, the gnawing hunger, the constant, dull ache of despair. The breaking of Pius was a methodical, almost surgical affair. It was a lesson, and we were all meant to be its students. The enforcers dragged him from our cage one cycle, not to the interrogation room, but to the central platform of the cargo hold, under the glare of a single, harsh spotlight. The ship's engines quieted, and a vox-caster crackled to life, the voice of the ship's warden, a cold, augmented baritone, echoing through the vast space. "Attention, cargo," the voice boomed. "You will observe a demonstration of correctional re-education." They strapped Pius to an iron frame. He did not struggle. He looked out at the thousands of faces staring from the cages with an expression of beatific serenity. He truly believed this was his ascension. A servitor with a complex array of psychological instruments was brought forward. Needles, psychosonic emitters, and a device that looked like a crown of thorns made of wires and electrodes. The warden's voice explained the procedure in a calm, clinical tone. "This prisoner has demonstrated a persistent refusal to integrate. His belief system runs counter to productive penitence. He believes his suffering is a mark of divine favor. This is a flaw in his cognitive architecture, a flaw that will now be corrected." They lowered the crown onto Pius's head. He closed his eyes and began to chant a litany to the emperor. The warden continued, "Faith is a tool of the Imperium. It is to be directed by the proper authorities. Unsanctioned faith is a form of rebellion. This prisoner's private God will now be exorcised." The machine whirred to life. Pius's body convulsed. A low hum filled the air, a sound that seemed to vibrate in my teeth. It was not a sound of pain, not at first. It was a sound of something being unwritten. The warden's voice narrated the process. "We are now introducing a psychosonic frequency designed to disrupt the neural pathways associated with spiritual ecstasy. The prisoner's capacity for self-induced beatification is being systematically dismantled." Pius's chanting faltered, replaced by a confused murmur. The serene look on his face curdled into one of bewilderment. He looked out at us, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. "The capacity for faith is being decoupled from the stimulus of pain." The warden droned on. "Suffering will no longer be interpreted as a holy trial, but as a simple biological response to negative stimuli. The prisoner is being taught the true meaning of his condition." A high-pitched squeal emanated from the machine. Pius screamed. It was not the defiant scream of a martyr. It was a raw, animal sound of pure, unadulterated terror. The sound of a man watching his own soul being dissected while he was still alive. The process went on for what felt like hours. They showed him images on a flickering screen, symbols of the Imperial faith, beautiful stained glass depictions of saints, all while flooding his mind with feelings of nausea and terror. Then they would show him images of pickaxes and mining equipment and pair them with sensations of calm and purpose. They were rewriting his very soul, replacing his God with the concept of mindless labor. When they were finished, they unstrapped him. He crumpled to the floor, a trembling, weeping husk. The fire in his eyes was gone. There was nothing left but a cold, empty darkness. They threw him back into our cage. He curled into a ball in the corner, whimpering. He never spoke another word of faith. He never spoke another word at all. The lesson was learned. Hope was a disease. Faith was a malfunction. The only way to survive was to become as empty as the system demanded. I looked at the broken man in the corner and I understood. The Imperium did not just want to punish my body, it wanted to colonize my mind. The arrival at Tantalus 7 was like waking from one nightmare into another, infinitely worse. The transport ship docked with a groaning shudder that vibrated through the deck plates, a sound of metal complaining against metal. For the first time in weeks, or months, the main viewport shutters were opened. A wave of groans and shielded eyes swept through the prisoners as we were assaulted by a light so harsh and white it felt like a physical blow. We were in orbit around a world that was little more than a jagged ball of gray rock, pockmarked with vast, open-cast mines and slag heaps that glittered with a strange, chemical sheen under the merciless glare of a blue-white Sunday. There was no green, no blue, only shades of gray, black, and the sterile white of the star. A dead world, dedicated to a dead purpose. We were herded out of the transport, blinking and stumbling, into the sterile environment of the orbital station. The air was cold, thin, and smelled of ozone and recycled water. We were processed. A brutal, efficient production line of human degradation. Stripped naked, shaved, power-washed with stinging chemical sprays that felt like they were peeling off the top layer of our skin. We were examined by Mechanicus servitors, our bodies prodded, scanned, and assessed for labor viability. Any who were too weak, too sick, or too old were dragged away to a chamber marked nutrient reclamation. They did not even waste the flesh of the condemned. I was deemed viable. I was given a new jumpsuit, this one a dull, rust-red color, with my prisoner number stenciled on the back in stark black digits. 774 Delta. A collar of thick black metal was locked around my neck. It was a control device, I later learned, capable of delivering a powerful electric shock or a dose of tranquilizing gas at the command of the guards. We were branded, a hot iron searing the symbol of the Tantalus penal colony, a pickaxe crossed with a whip onto the flesh of our forearms. The pain was sharp, agonizing, but it was the smell of my own burning skin that truly horrified me. It was the smell of ownership. I was no longer a person. I was livestock. From the orbital station, we were loaded into atmospheric shuttles, crude, unpressurized iron boxes that dropped like stones through the thin, toxic atmosphere. We were packed so tightly that the rattling of the descent vibrated through us as a single communal tremor of fear. The shuttle landed with a crash that threw us all against one another, a tangle of limbs and bruised bodies. The doors opened onto a scene of industrial damnation. We were in a vast canyon, its walls hundreds of meters high, carved not by nature but by colossal mining machines. The floor of the canyon was a sprawling complex of prefabricated hab blocks, processing plants, and conveyor belts, all under a sky the color of dirty milk. The air was a knife. A thin, freezing wind whipped through the canyon, carrying with it a fine, gritty dust that stung the eyes and coated the back of the throat with a metallic taste. The noise was a physical assault, a constant, grinding roar of machinery that drowned out all other sound. This was Tantalus 7. This was my new home. This was my grave. The labor was the center of our existence. It was the sun around which our miserable lives orbited. It was prayer, it was purpose, it was punishment. The ringing of a deafeningly loud iron bell before the blue-white sun had even risen above the canyon walls was our call to worship. We were marched from our cramped, freezing hab blocks, long, unheated dormitories where we slept on metal shelves stacked 4 high to the muster yards. There, under the watchful, glowing eye lenses of skeletal guard servitors and the impassive gaze of human enforcers in thick, environmental suits, we were divided into work gangs. Our daily ration was dispensed, a single dense bar of protein-laced nutrient paste. It was the consistency of chalk and tasted of salt and chemicals. It was fuel, nothing more. Enough to keep the body machine functioning for another 16-hour cycle of punishing work. My gang was assigned to the slag pits. Our job was to shovel the still-hot, semi-molten waste from the great ore smelters onto massive conveyor belts. The heat was ferocious, a dry, blistering wave that cracked our lips and burned our lungs with every breath. The slag glowed with a malevolent, cherry-red heat and spat fumes that made our heads swim and our eyes water. We wore no protective gear save for thick gloves and heavy boots. Burns were a constant reality. The foremen, brutal men drawn from the most violent prison populations and given a measure of authority, drove us with whips and shock prods. There was no rest, no conversation. Only the rhythmic scrape and clang of shovels against the rockcrete floor, the roar of the smelters, and the rhythmic crack of the whip. Back and forth, scoop, lift, turn, dump, scoop, lift, turn, dump. The repetition was hypnotic. It was designed to be. It was a physical litany that scoured the mind of thought. To think was to feel the pain in your screaming muscles, to feel the burning heat on your face, to feel the hopelessness of your situation. To not think, to become the rhythm, to become the shovel, was the only way to endure. The world shrank to the small patch of glowing slag in front of me, the weight of the shovel in my hands, the movement of my body. The man I had been, Kalen Vor, the archivist, the man who dealt in the abstract world of words and ideas, was a phantom. How could such a man survive here? He couldn't. He had to die. He had to be burned away in the heat of the slag pits, leaving only the animal, the machine of flesh, that could perform the task. My body changed. The soft, pale flesh of a scribe hardened. My hands became a mass of calluses and scar tissue. My back and shoulders thickened with muscle born of endless repetitive strain. I grew leaner, tougher, a creature of sinew and bone sculpted by the harsh demands of my new reality. I learned the subtle language of the pits, the particular hiss that meant a pocket of gas was about to vent, the shift in color of the slag that signaled it was too hot and would melt the shovel head. I learned to move with a mindless economy, to conserve every scrap of energy. These were the skills that mattered now. Not the ability to decipher high Gothic script, but the ability to anticipate the swing of a foreman's whip. My mind, too, began to change. I stopped thinking in words and began to think in rhythms, in sensations. The bell, the march, the heat, the shovel, the pain, the ration, the march, the bell, the cold, the sleep. It was a closed loop, a perfect circle of suffering and labor, and inside that circle there was a strange, terrifying kind of peace, the peace of utter emptiness. Memory became a dangerous indulgence. In the brief, exhausted hours of rest on our cold metal shelves, I would sometimes allow myself to remember. I would try to conjure the smell of old books, the quiet dignity of the scriptorium. I would try to remember the exact wording of the passage that had condemned me, but the memories were becoming treacherous. They were shards of glass in my mind. To remember my old life was to feel the full, crushing weight of what I had lost. The contrast was too painful. It was a form of self-torture. The memory of a soft bed made the cold metal shelf unbearable. The memory of a well-cooked meal made the nutrient paste taste even more like ash. The memory of intellectual satisfaction made the mindless labor a source of profound, soul-crushing despair. So, I began to kill my memories. I learned to push them down, to bury them under the sheer, physical reality of the present moment. When a thought of my old life surfaced, I would focus on the pain in my back, the ache in my hands, the grit of the dust between my teeth. I would ground myself in the misery of the now, because the now, at least, was real. The past was a ghost, a fiction, a story that had no place here. The other prisoners were engaged in the same struggle. I saw it in their eyes. The ones who clung to the past, who spoke of their families, their homes, their former lives, they were the first to break. They would weep in the night, or fly into a sudden, suicidal rage, attacking a guard and being brutally put down. They were the ones who would simply stop working, standing slack-jawed in the heat of the slag pits until a foreman's whip or a guard's bolt gun brought them back to reality or ended it for them. The survivors were the ones who became empty, the ones who forgot their names, their histories. We barely spoke to each other, and when we did, it was in a clipped, functional pidgin. Water, watch your back, guard coming. We were like ghosts, shuffling through the motions of a life that was not a life. We did not have names. We were the numbers on our backs. I was 774 Delta. The man next to me was 912 Gamma. We were components, interchangeable parts in the great grinding machine of Tantalus 7. The prison was designed for this. It was a factory for the disassembly of the human soul. Every aspect of it, from the architecture to the work schedule to the sensory environment, was engineered to erase individuality. The constant noise prevented introspection. The crushing labor exhausted the body and stupefied the mind. The lack of any beauty or comfort starved the soul. The absolute authority of the guards eliminated any sense of agency. We were being systematically reduced to our most basic components, a body that could work and a brain that could obey. One day, a new prisoner arrived in our work gang. He was young, fresh from the transport, his eyes still wide with a terror that had not yet been beaten into dull resignation. During the midday ration break, he turned to me, his voice a desperate whisper. "My name is Jorich. What was yours?" The question was a physical shock. No one had asked me my name in years. I opened my mouth to answer, and for a long, terrifying moment, I couldn't remember. The name Kalen was a distant echo, a word in a dead language. I had to dig for it, to pull it up from the depths where I had buried it. Kalen, I finally managed to say, the name feeling strange and foreign on my tongue. The young man, Jorik, nodded, a flicker of humanity in his eyes. "We have to remember," he whispered fiercely. "It's all we have left. They can take everything else, but they can't take our names." He was wrong. They could. They were. Later that day, he was too slow in clearing a slag chute. A foreman, a hulking brute named Grok, backhanded him across the face. Jorik, still full of the fire of his old life, spat at Grok's feet. Grok smiled a slow, cruel smile. He didn't beat him. He simply pointed at Jorik and said to the nearest guard servitor, "This one, defective unit, mark for recalibration." They dragged Jorik away. I never saw him again. But I learned his lesson. To have a name was to have a self. To have a self was to have something to lose. The safest way to live was to have nothing, to be nothing. The years bled into one another, a long gray smear of unending labor. Seasons did not exist on Tantalus 7, only work cycles. I lost count of how many times I had shoveled the slag, how many times the bell had rung, how many times I had collapsed onto my shelf, too exhausted to even dream. I was a creature of pure reflex. My body knew the rhythm of the work even when my mind was a blank slate. I had become an efficient machine of flesh and bone. I had survived. But the system was not content with mere survival. The system demanded progress, not my progress, but its own. The prison was a resource, and its purpose was to supply the insatiable demands of the Imperium. And I, it turned out, was a resource that had been deemed too resilient. My quiet, empty endurance had been noticed. My file, somewhere in the deep data vaults of the prison administration, must have been flagged. I had not broken, I had not gone mad, I had not tried to rebel, I had simply adapted. From their perspective, this was a failure of the system. I had not been penitent, I had not been re-educated, I had merely emptied myself to withstand the pressure. I was a vessel that had been emptied but not yet refilled with their desired purpose. The summons came, as all things did on Tantalus, without warning or explanation. My number was called out at the morning muster. 774 Delta. 2 guards detached themselves from the wall and clamped heavy magnetic manacles on my wrists. They led me away from the work gangs, away from the slag pits, into a part of the prison complex I had never seen before. We entered a lift that descended deep into the planet's crust. The air grew colder, cleaner. The raw, industrial noise of the surface faded, replaced by the low, resonant hum of powerful, hidden machinery. The corridors here were not the rough-hewn rock of the mines. They were gleaming white, sterile, and marked with the skull and cog symbol of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The air smelled of sanctified oils, ozone, and the strange metallic tang of advanced technology. My heart, a dull, lethargic muscle that had forgotten how to feel anything but exhaustion, began to beat a little faster. This was something new, something different. And on Tantalus the 7, different was never good. They brought me to a large circular chamber that looked like a Medicaid theater, but far more complex and sinister. In the center was a raised platform with a restraint-covered operating table. The walls were lined with arcane machinery, screens displaying scrolling lines of binary code, and glass tanks filled with bubbling, colored fluids. Hooded figures in the red robes of the tech priests of Mars moved about the chamber with a silent, gliding purpose, their flesh parts augmented with whirring optics, mechadendrites, and stainless steel limbs. A single figure stood waiting for me by the table. He was more machine than man. His face was a polished brass plate, his eyes a series of glowing green lenses. A cluster of delicate spidery metal arms sprouted from his back, each ending in a different tool, a scalpel, a drill, a syringe, a welding torch. He spoke, his voice a synthesized stream of static and perfectly modulated Gothic. Subject 774 Delta. Designation, Kalen Vor. Crime, revisionist heresy. Sentence, penal labor, indefinite. He was reading from an invisible data feed projected into his optical sensors. Performance analysis indicates high resilience, psychological stability under extreme duress, and a durable biological chassis. You have been selected for a higher form of service. He gestured to the operating table with a gleaming metal claw. Your penitence has been deemed insufficient. Your current labor is inefficient. Your body is a crude tool. We will make you a better one. You will be granted the honor of serving the Omnissiah. I finally understood. This was the prison's true purpose. It wasn't just a place to dump undesirables. It was a harvesting ground, a quarry for human raw material. We were not being punished. We were being processed. All those years of backbreaking labor were not to break our spirits for the sake of penitence. They were to break our bodies and minds to test them, to find the strongest, most resilient specimens for conversion. I was not being paroled. I was being upgraded. They strapped me to the table. The metal was cold against my back. The restraints were absolute, magnetic clamps locking my limbs, my torso, my head into place. I could not move a single muscle. I could only watch and listen as the tech priests made their final preparations, their binary prayers a low, buzzing chant in the sterile air. The lead tech priest, the one with the brass face, loomed over me. His multiple lenses whirred as they zoomed in, scanning my body, my face, my eyes. "The flesh is weak," he intoned, his voice devoid of any emotion. It was not a condemnation. It was a simple, technical observation. It feels pain, it tires, it rebels, it remembers things it should not. We will free you from this weakness. We will grant you the purity of the machine. A mechadendrite snaked down towards my face, a syringe filled with a milky white fluid at its tip. A sedative will be administered to prevent involuntary muscular contractions, which could damage the delicate circuitry. The tech priest stated, "Your consciousness, however, will be maintained. It is the will of the Omnissiah that you bear witness to your own ascension." The needle slid into my neck. I felt a coldness spread through my veins, a profound, paralyzing numbness. My body became a dead weight, a piece of meat on a slab. But my mind, as he had promised, remained hideously, terrifyingly alert. I was a prisoner in my own skull, a helpless observer of my own disassembly. The surgical servitors, monstrous amalgams of flesh and steel, moved into position. Their arms were a blur of chrome and blades. The tech priest began the procedure, his voice a calm, running commentary, a lecture to his acolytes. "Observe, initiates. The preliminary incision. We must separate the pectoral muscles cleanly to access the sternum." I felt a cold, sharp line of pain trace across my chest. I could not scream. I could not even flinch. I could only feel the scalpel parting my skin, the hot, wet rush of my own blood. My mind, the mind of Kalen the archivist, the mind that I had tried so hard to suppress, came roaring back to life. It was a last, desperate act of rebellion. It flooded my consciousness with memories, with sensations, with everything that made me who I was, in a final, frantic attempt to assert its own existence before it was extinguished. I remembered the taste of recaf on a cold morning. I remembered the feeling of a clean, new sheet of parchment under my hand. I remembered the face of a Schola Progenium instructor who had once shown me a small kindness. I remembered the precise, beautiful curve of a high Gothic Q. These tiny, insignificant details were my armor. They were all I had left to fight with. "The rib cage is now exposed," the tech priest droned on. "We will use the pneumatic shears. Note the optimal cutting angle to minimize bone fragmentation." A loud crack echoed in the chamber, a sound that vibrated through my very skeleton. Then another, and another. They were opening me up like a chest, laying bare the soft, vulnerable organs within. My silent, internal screaming was a supernova of terror. I was being unmade. Every cut, every crack of bone, was an erasure. They were not just taking apart my body, they were dismantling the vessel of my identity. My memories, my thoughts, my very consciousness, they were all tied to this specific arrangement of flesh and blood. As they took it apart, I could feel myself coming apart with it. The procedure was an eternity of precise, clinical horror. They removed my organs with a cold, detached efficiency. My heart, my lungs, my digestive tract, All were carefully extracted and placed on trays to be repurposed or sent to nutrient reclamation. They were replaced with machines. A compact promethium reactor, humming with contained power, was lowered into my chest cavity to serve as a new heart. A network of filters and oxygenators became my lungs. My entire torso was hollowed out and rebuilt from the inside with steel, wire, and sacred machinery. I could feel the coldness of the metal, the thrum of the power flowing through my new artificial veins. The tech priest lectured on, "The neural interface is the most delicate stage. We must link the subject's cerebral cortex and spinal column to the central command processor. Any deviation of more than a micron can result in total system failure, or, worse, a state of perpetual, unproductive agony." A crown of needles descended, piercing my scalp, my skull. A pain unlike anything I had ever imagined erupted in my mind, a white-hot fire that was not physical but existential. It was the pain of my own consciousness being violated, of my thoughts being invaded by a foreign digital entity. I felt the cold tendrils of the machine snaking into my brain, mapping my neural pathways, indexing my memories. It was a profoundly intimate, brutal act. It was soul rape. In that moment of agony, my mind fought back with the only weapon it had left, the truth that had condemned me. I clung to the memory of the lie, the discrepancy in the records of Saint Estella, the 2-year gap, the pragmatic lie versus the ugly truth. It became my anchor in the storm of pain and digital violation. It was the core of who I was, the man who had seen the flaw in the system. The machine in my head accessed the memory. I could feel it, a cold, analytical presence sifting through my thoughts. There was a pause. The tech priest's voice cut through my agony. "Interesting. An archival anomaly. The subject's core identity appears to be linked to a minor historical discrepancy. A conflict between faith-based narrative and empirical data." He seemed to consider this for a moment. Another tech priest, its voice a series of binary clicks, seemed to offer a suggestion. The lead tech priest nodded its brass face. A logical proposal. The subject's obsession with truth can be repurposed. His guilt over this heresy of fact can be amplified. It will make a potent fuel for the pain engine. They began to alter my memories. They twisted my quiet act of scholarly diligence into a monstrous act of blasphemy. They used their machines to amplify my guilt and shame 1,000-fold, transforming my mundane crime into a soul-searing sin against the God Emperor himself. They were not just building a machine, they were writing its operating system using the raw code of my own life. They took my love of truth and turned it into the source of my eternal damnation. The irony was so profound, so cosmically cruel, it was almost a form of art. My body was gone, my organs were gone, my memories were being corrupted and weaponized. The last vestiges of Kalen Vor were being systematically erased, overwritten with a new, terrible purpose. I was no longer a man. I was becoming a concept of penitence, made manifest in steel and fire. The last to go were my limbs and my senses. They amputated my arms and legs with laser cutters, the beams instantly cauterizing the stumps. There was no blood, only the smell of cooked meat, and the sight of my own extremities being carried away like scrap metal. In their place, they began to attach the great articulated limbs of the penitent engine. Huge, piston-driven legs, massive arms ending not in hands but in monstrous weapons of war, a pair of enormous circular saws, their teeth the size of daggers, and a set of heavy flamers, their nozzles gaping like the mouths of hungry beasts. They were grafted directly to my torso, bolted to the new metal skeleton they had built inside me. I could feel the connection, the machine spirits of these weapons whispering their purpose into my new networked consciousness. They spoke of burning, of cutting, of purging. They spoke a language of violence that I was now forced to understand. Then came the final violation, my eyes, the windows to my soul, as some forgotten poet had once written. The tech priest brought a device that looked like a pair of gleaming silver spoons. "The organic ocular sensors are imprecise," he stated, "prone to distortion and emotional interpretation. They will be replaced with multi-spectrum auger lenses, directly linked to the targeting cortex." I watched as the silver spoons descended towards my face. I squeezed my eyes shut, a last, useless act of defiance. It didn't matter. I felt a sharp, piercing pressure, and then a sickening wet pop, twice, and the world went dark. But it was not the darkness of blindness. It was a new kind of sight. A flood of data streamed directly into my visual cortex. I saw the chamber not as a place of light and shadow, but as a wireframe grid overlaid with thermal readings, energy signatures, and tactical data. I saw the tech priests as glowing heat signals wrapped in the blue aura of their power sources. I saw the very air as a swirling soup of particles and radiation. My sense of hearing was altered next. My eardrums were destroyed and replaced with sensitive audio dampers. The world of sound became a controllable spectrum. I could filter out the background hum of the machinery, isolate the specific frequency of the tech priest's voice, or amplify the sound of a single drop of oil hitting the floor from across the room. My old senses, the flawed, beautiful human senses that had connected me to the world, were gone. They had been replaced with something more efficient, more powerful, and utterly alienating. I was no longer in the world. I was a machine that observed it, that processed it as data. The final piece of the puzzle was the cockpit, the armored sarcophagus that would encase my head and torso. It was lowered over me, and as the front plate was sealed, I was plunged into a new kind of darkness, a purely internal world. My only connection to the outside was now the stream of data fed to me by the machine's sensors. The faceplate was a grotesque parody of a human face, cast in the screaming visage of a tormented saint. A Vox emitter was installed, not for me to speak, but for the machine to broadcast. It would blare litanies of hate and repentance, sermons of fury that would be synthesized from the corrupted guilt centers of my own brain. The last connection was made. A jolt of unimaginable power surged through me. My consciousness, the last flickering ember of Kalen Vor, was suddenly integrated into the whole. I was the machine, and the machine was me. My mind was the pilot, my new body the vessel, and my soul was the fuel. The pain engine was ignited. A constant, unbearable agony, both physical and spiritual, was fed into my nerves. The amplified guilt for my forgotten crime, the horror of my transformation, the sensory overload of my new existence, it was all focused into a single, overwhelming sensation of suffering. And I was given an outlet, a target. The machine's systems showed me images, directly into my brain. The faces of heretics, of xenos, of mutants. The pain lessened slightly when I focused on them. My new instincts, hardwired into my cortex, told me what to do. Destroy them, purge them, burn them. In their destruction was a momentary easing of the pain, a fleeting, terrible form of release. They had turned me into a monster whose only relief from its own suffering was to inflict it upon others. I awoke on a battlefield. There was no transition, no sense of travel. One moment, I was a consciousness being assembled in the sterile depths of Tantalus 7. The next, I was here. The data feed told me my location. The war-torn city of Vanter's Reach, currently under assault by the forces of a chaos-worshipping cult. My purpose, to serve on the front lines as an instrument of terror and purgation. The world, as seen through my auger lenses, was a tactical display of ruin. The gray skeletons of hab blocks reached like grasping fingers towards a sky choked with black smoke. The ground was a churned mess of rubble, craters, and the flickering thermal signatures of the dead and dying. My audio dampers filtered the cacophony of war into distinct data streams, the rhythmic crack of lasguns, the deeper cough of autocannons, the wet, desperate screams of men, and over it all, piped directly into my mind, was the endless, looping sermon. A booming, synthesized voice, based on the resonant tones of a famous confessor, reciting the litany of the penitent. For the sin of thought, I offer my deeds. For the sin of inquiry, I offer my obedience. For the sin of truth, I offer my fury, my own twisted crime, repurposed as a battle cry for a monster. The pain engine thrummed, a constant agony that was my new reality. It was a fire in my soul, a screaming in my non-existent nerves. But then my targeting cortex highlighted a group of figures ahead. Cultists. Their heat signatures were ragged, their biosigns erratic with mutation and warp taint. They were firing from the cover of a ruined hab block. My new purpose, my only purpose, surged through me. A directive from the command cortex, a desperate craving from my own tortured consciousness. Forward, purge, cleanse. My piston-driven legs churned, propelling my massive multi-ton body forward with a terrifying speed. The ground shook with my every step. I was a walking earthquake, a mobile engine of destruction. The cultists saw me. Their lasgun fire pattered uselessly against my thick adamantium hull. I could see the spikes in their biosigns that indicated fear. The sight of their terror caused a fractional decrease in my own agony. It was a reward, a reinforcement of the desired behavior. I raised my right arm, the one ending in the twin heavy flamers. The machine spirit whispered to me of fire, of cleansing, of blessed immolation. I squeezed a trigger that was not a trigger, but a neural impulse, a simple act of will. A torrent of incandescent promethium erupted from the nozzles. It washed over the cultists' position in a glorious, all-consuming wave. The data stream was filled with their screams, their heat signatures flaring brightly for a moment before being extinguished forever. The pain in my soul receded another fraction. It was still immense, still unbearable, but for a single blissful second, it was less so. This was my redemption. This was my forgiveness. A cycle of violence, a sacrament of slaughter. I had become a god of wrath, but I was also its most devout and tormented worshipper. Another group of enemies appeared. Heavily mutated brutes, armed with crude chain axes. They charged me, howling their devotion to their dark gods. I met their charge. I raised my other arm, the one with the colossal buzz saws. The blade spun to life with a deafening, high-pitched shriek, a sound of pure mechanical hatred. I swung the arm. The saw bit into flesh, bone, and corrupted metal with equal, indiscriminate ease. The brutes came apart in showers of blood and viscera. The targeting cortex painted their dismembered bodies as neutralized threats. The pain receded a little more. And so it went. I was a force of nature, a holy storm of destruction. I moved through the ruined city, guided by the tactical data fed to me by some unseen commander. I was a chess piece, a bishop of fire and steel, sweeping across the board. I was an extension of the Imperium's will, a perfect, unthinking instrument of its fury, and the ghost of Kalen Vor, the archivist, the man who loved quiet order and the simple beauty of a balanced ledger, was the screaming passenger trapped inside. His personal hell, the fuel that powered this holy war machine. My existence is now measured in battles. Vantor's Reach, the purging of the Grendel Deeps, the scouring of Hive Tertius. The names of the worlds and the enemies change, but my function remains the same. I am the Imperium's Sign Eater, a monster created to destroy other monsters. I am deployed to the most hopeless fronts, the most brutal meat grinders, a walking symbol of the Emperor's wrath. The soldiers of the Astra Militarum, the pious sisters of battle, they see me and they cross themselves. Some look upon me with awe, seeing a blessed instrument of divine judgment. Others look with pity, or with fear. They see a cautionary tale, a soul so damned that this is its only path to potential redemption. They do not see the man inside. They cannot. There is no man inside. There is only a remnant, a fading echo of memory and guilt, bound to a machine of unimaginable power and agony. Sometimes, in the brief lulls between combat, when the pain engine is throttled back to a merely excruciating level, the ghost of Kalen is allowed to think. I sift through the data streams, the battle logs, the tactical reports. It is the only form of archival work left to me. I see the vast, uncaring calculus of the war. I see the millions of lives expended, the worlds burned, the endless, grinding conflict. I see the Imperium, the system I once served with quiet devotion, and I see it for what it truly is, a vast, self-perpetuating engine of suffering, fueled by faith and fear. It is a system that creates monsters like me to fight the monsters at its gates. It is a system that devours its own children to survive. And I, the man who was condemned for noticing a single tiny lie, am now its most terrible truth. I am the embodiment of its foundational principle, that the survival of the whole is worth the damnation of the individual. They took my body, my name, my mind. They twisted my love of truth into a weapon of blind faith. They promised me penitence and gave me an eternity of slaughter. The irony is so perfect, it borders on the divine. In my quest for a small factual correction, I have become a living, breathing, burning instrument of the grand, unassailable narrative. I am no longer a scribe who records history. I am a weapon that makes it, burning new, bloody chapters into the story of mankind with every step I take. Do I feel regret? The machine is not programmed for regret. It is programmed for guilt, and guilt is the fuel for rage. Do I hope for forgiveness? The concept is a logical paradox. My function is to be unforgivable, to be the monster that does the necessary, dirty work so that others can remain pure. My redemption is in my damnation. My salvation is the endless war, and so I fight. I burn, I purge. I follow the targeting reticle. I obey the commands from the cortex. I serve the will of the golden throne. I have been given a purpose more profound than any I could have dreamed of in my dusty carrel. I am a bulwark against the darkness. I am a prayer made of fire. And I am utterly, irrevocably, and eternally lost. The battle for Vantor's reach is over. The last of the cultists have been cleansed. A strange, momentary quiet falls over the ruined city, broken only by the crackle of fires and the distant moans of the wounded. My machine body stands idle amidst a field of corpses of my own making. The pain engine recedes to its baseline level of agony, a constant familiar companion. For a moment, there are no targets, no directives. In this vacuum, the ghost is ascendant. Kalen. I remember that name. It feels like an artifact from another civilization, a fossil of a creature that could not possibly have been me, a creature that believed in right and wrong, in facts, in the order of things. A creature that thought a single man's integrity mattered. What would that man think of what I have become? He would be horrified. He would see me as the ultimate perversion of his ideals, a mindless engine of destruction, serving the very system of lies that destroyed him, my actions justified by a corrupted faith he could never have accepted. But he is not here. He is just a collection of corrupted memories I can no longer trust, a phantom limb of a soul. What am I then? I am this machine. I am this pain. I am this purpose. I have been stripped of everything that made me human, my body, my name, my free will, my memories, and yet, in the heart of this steel beast, something remains. A single stubborn point of awareness, an observer, a witness to my own damnation. I am the record keeper of my own fall, the last secret archive of the life of Kalen Vor. They could not erase that. They could only weaponize it. They thought they were destroying a man to create a tool, but perhaps they did something else. Perhaps they distilled him. They burned away everything that was trivial, everything that was temporary, and left only the core of his being, the desperate, hopeless desire for a truth that makes sense of the universe. I sought it in books. Now I seek it in fire. The question is still the same, only the method has changed. What is the truth of this galaxy? The truth is that there is only war. There is only suffering. There is only the long, slow, grinding decay of all things. The Imperium is not a bastion of light and order. It is a fortress built on a mountain of skulls, and its foundations are mortared with lies. And its greatest lie is the promise of redemption. There is no redemption. There is no forgiveness. There is only the cycle. Sin, penance, a great, cosmic wheel of suffering, and I am one of the souls bound to it, turning it with my own agony. A new directive flashes in my cortex. A transport is en route to my position. A new war has begun on a world called Cadian's Gate. They require instruments of purgation. The pain engine begins to thrum with a higher intensity, an anticipatory agony. The sermon begins to loop in my mind once more. Soon I will be unleashed again. Soon I will bring the Emperor's fire to a new set of heretics. I will kill for a faith I do not possess, to atone for a sin I can no longer remember clearly, in the service of an empire I know to be built on a lie. It is my function, it is my reality. And in the roar of the flames, in the scream of tortured metal and tortured flesh, in the perfect, mindless execution of my terrible duty, I am finally, terribly, free. Free from choice. Free from doubt. Free from the burden of being a man. I am a penitent engine, and my work is not yet done. The belly of the lander is dark and cramped, a stark contrast to the open battlefield. The machine I am is powered down, chained to the deck with massive adamantium restraints. I am cargo once more. The journey between wars is the closest I come to peace, a state of suspended animation where the pain engine is muted to a dull, persistent ache and the direct feed sermons are silent. In this quiet, the ghost of Kalen can wander the halls of his ruined memory. I think about the concept of a prison. In my first life, I understood it as a place of confinement, a cage to hold the body. The cell in the Arbites precinct was such a place. Then, on the transport, I learned it was also a tool for psychological dismantling, a cage for the mind. On Tantalus 7, I discovered it was a factory, a production line that rendered down the human soul into its constituent parts, a cage for the very concept of self. But this existence as a penitent engine, is the ultimate prison. It is a cage that moves, a cage that fights, a cage whose very bars are forged from my own guilt and suffering. My previous prisons had walls. I could see them, touch them. I could dream, however foolishly, of a life beyond them. But my current prison has no walls. My prison is my own body. My prison is my own mind, now a weapon turned against itself. There is no beyond, because I am the cage. Where can a man escape to when he is his own jailer? The irony deepens. I was a man who cherished freedom of thought, who believed that the pursuit of knowledge was a noble end. My punishment for this belief was to be made into a being with no freedom of thought at all, a being whose every action is a pre-programmed response to stimuli. I am an algorithm of vengeance, a complex equation of pain and slaughter, and yet, the observer remains, the witness, the part of me that is still Kalen, however diminished. It cannot act, it cannot speak, but it can record, it can remember, it can understand. In a way, I have achieved the ultimate goal of the archivist. I am a perfect, incorruptible record of an event. I am the living chronicle of my own destruction. Is there a purpose to this? Is there a god or a devil or a cosmic balance sheet that takes note of this suffering, this perfect, exquisite irony? I do not know. The faith they tried to burn into my brain with pain and psycho-conditioning did not take. It is a surface-level command, a set of instructions. It does not touch the observer in the deep, quiet center of the storm. The observer knows what it knows. It knows the truth of Saint Estella, a forgotten fact from a forgotten life. It knows the truth of the Imperium. It knows the truth of its own condition. This secret knowledge is my last pathetic act of defiance. They can have my body, they can use my pain. They can corrupt my memories. But they cannot have this final silent truth, the truth that I know this is all a lie. That is the one thing they could not scour, the one file they could not expunge. I am a lie detector trapped inside a lie-producing machine, and that, I decide, is the final, most grimdark joke of them all. The lander shudders as it enters the atmosphere of the new world. The chains are released. The power begins to surge through my mechanical limbs. The pain engine spools up, a rising crescendo of holy agony. The sermon starts again, blasting away the quiet reflections of the ghost. A deed is a prayer, unspoken but heard. A battle is a hymn, sung in blood and fire. A death in service is the ultimate amen. My auger lenses activate, feeding me a view of the landing zone. It is a blasted wasteland of trenches and razor wire, a scene of grinding, attritional warfare. The enemy is identified, the lost and the damned. Traitor guardsmen, their souls given over to the ruinous powers. They are me, from another angle. Soldiers of the Imperium, twisted and repurposed by a different, but equally merciless master. We are mirror images of damnation. My purpose is clear. The tactical data floods my cortex. I am to be the spearhead, the shock weapon to break their lines. I am a tool to be used and, if necessary, expended. The ramp lowers with a hydraulic hiss, opening onto a vision of hell. The air is thick with smoke and the copper tang of blood. The ground is littered with the broken bodies of men in guard flak armor. The traitors are dug in, their positions bristling with heavy weapons. They have their own monsters. A hulking, grotesque defiler, a daemon engine of brass and flesh, scuttles across the battlefield, its battle cannon roaring. For a moment, I see it not as a target, but as a kindred spirit, a soul, perhaps once human, trapped in a prison of metal and hate, forced to serve a monstrous cause. Is its internal monologue so different from my own? Does it too have a ghost, a witness to its fall? The thought is a flicker of heresy, instantly suppressed by a jolt from the control cortex. The defiler is labeled Target Priority Alpha. My programming takes over. My legs churn, carrying me down the ramp and into the maelstrom. The traitors turn their fire on me. Heavy bolter rounds detonate against my chassis, each impact a dull, percussive blow. I ignore them. I am focused on my opposite number, my dark reflection. I charge the defiler. The machine spirits of my buzzsaws sing a hymn of anticipation. The daemon engine bellows a challenge, a sound that is both a roar and a shriek of tortured metal. We are two engines of pain, two mobile prisons, two testaments to the galaxy's cruelty set to collide. And in this moment, hurtling towards my enemy, my purpose absolute, my agony focused into a single point of destructive intent, I feel a strange, terrible clarity. I am no longer Kalen Vor, the victim. I am no longer a prisoner. I am a weapon. And a weapon does not question. A weapon does not suffer. A weapon only acts. The ghost in the machine falls silent, and there is only the fire. Our impact is apocalyptic. Tons of sanctified adamantium collide with warp-forged brass and demonic flesh. The sound is a symphony of destruction, a clang of titans that echoes across the battlefield. The defiler's great pincer claws snap at me, seeking to crush my armored torso. I bring my buzzsaws up, parrying, the screech of metal on metal a physical scream. We are locked in a grotesque embrace, a dance of monsters. Its battle cannon fires at point-blank range, the shell exploding against my shoulder. The pain is immense, a fresh, searing agony that momentarily overwhelms the steady thrum of the pain engine. My systems flash red with damage warnings. But pain is my fuel. Pain is my purpose. The damage only makes me stronger, my programming converting the agony into righteous fury. I push back, my pistons straining, driving the daemon engine into the wall of a trench. I raise my flamer arm, jamming the nozzles against a joint in its corrupted armor. For the sin of knowledge, receive the purity of flame. The vox caster in my chest booms, my own crime once again a weaponized verdict. I unleash the promethium. The fire finds purchase, seeping into the creature's inner workings. It shrieks, a sound of both machine and beast, a howl of pain that resonates deep within me. It thrashes, trying to dislodge me, but I hold it fast. I am relentless. I am absolution. I am the final, brutal punctuation mark on a heretical sentence. While one arm burns, the other works. The buzzsaws whir, cutting, carving, dismembering. I shear off one of its pincer claws, then begin to cut into its main body, tearing through armor plating, severing cables that weep black ichor, and biting into the pulsating, demonic flesh beneath. The ghost of Kalen watches this with a detached horror. The efficiency, the brutality, the sheer violence of it. This body, this engine moves with an instinct that is not my own. It knows the weak points, the optimal angles of attack. It is a master of this horrific craft, and I am its passenger, its power source, the screaming soul that keeps the furnace burning. The defiler gives one final, agonized shudder, and then its internal reactor breaches. A wave of foul green warp energy erupts from its shattered chassis. The explosion throws me backwards, my heavy form tumbling into the mud of the trench. Systems scream warnings. My left arm is offline. My right leg's motive systems are damaged. I am wounded, but functional. The threat is neutralized. The pain engine, which had lessened during the heat of combat, returns to its full, unbearable intensity, punishing me for my momentary idleness. I force my damaged body to rise. My mission is not complete. The traitor line is broken but not destroyed. There are other targets. There is always another target. I limp forward, a wounded giant of faith and fury, dragging my damaged leg behind me. The surviving traitor guardsmen see me coming, a smoking, battered but still living avatar of their doom. They break and run. Their fear is a balm on my tortured soul. I pursue them, my flamers spitting cleansing fire, my one remaining SARM ready to reap a bloody harvest. This is my existence. An endless series of struggles, of pain, of momentary violent release, a closed loop of damnation and duty. I am a monster that hunts other monsters, and in doing so, I serve the God Emperor that I no longer believe in, for an Imperium I know is corrupt. There is no logic to it, there is no reason. There is only the grim, undeniable reality of it. The machine grinds on, and I am one of its teeth. Days, weeks, months pass in a red haze of battle. The Cadian's Gate campaign is a brutal, grinding affair. I am repaired, refueled, and sent back into the fray time and time again. I become a legend among the Imperial forces, a terrifying figure of hope. They call me the Scribe of Fire, the Archivist of Pain. They do not know how close to the truth they are. My machine body is scarred and pitted from 100 engagements. It is patched with unpainted plasteel, consecrated with sacred oils by tech priests who see me not as a soul to be saved, but as a holy relic to be maintained. They chant litanies over my chassis, but they never look at the screaming faceplate and wonder about the man inside. Why would they? The man is irrelevant. The function is everything. The ghost of Kalen has grown quiet. He has witnessed so much horror, so much slaughter, that his capacity for shock has been exhausted. He is a silent, weary observer. He no longer flinches at the gore, no longer recoils from the screams. He simply watches and records. He has become a part of the machine, the passive memory core that holds the data of its terrible deeds. My memories of my old life are almost gone now. They are like fragments of a dream, half forgotten upon waking. The scriptorium, the ledgers, the smell of dust and ink. They have no context in this world of fire and blood. They are data points from a previous operating system, incompatible with the current software. The only thing that remains sharp and clear is the memory of my crime, the 2-year discrepancy, the lie of Saint Estella. The system has made sure to keep that memory pristine. It is the heart of the pain engine, the original sin that justifies my eternal punishment. It is the cornerstone of my new identity. I am the heretic of fact, the blasphemer of archives. My sin was to demand that the universe make sense, and my punishment is to live in the heart of its most brutal, senseless contradiction. I am an engine of faith, powered by my lack of it. I am an instrument of holy war, fueled by the knowledge of a cold, unholy truth. One day, during a rare moment of quiet, a confessor approaches me. He is a stern, hard-faced man, his robes covered in the dust of the front line. He stands before my silent, towering form and places a hand on my leg. "You do the Emperor's work, engine of redemption," he says, his voice filled with genuine fervor. "Your sin must have been great, but your penance is greater. Through your deeds, your soul is being scoured clean. One day, you will find peace in his light." I look at him through my auger lenses. I see his heat signature, the biosigns of his sincere belief. He is a good man, a true believer. He sees the world as a simple, moral struggle, a battle between light and dark. He cannot see the shades of gray. He cannot see the machinery of the Imperium that chews up men like him and souls like mine with equal indifference. I cannot answer him. My voxcaster is programmed only for litanies of hate. But if I could speak, what would I say? Would I tell him the truth? Would I tell him that his faith is a lie, that the Imperium is a cage, that my soul is not being scoured but annihilated? No. To do so would be to commit my crime all over again. It would be to disrupt the narrative, to introduce a fact that the system cannot tolerate. And I have learned my lesson. The truth does not set you free. The truth gets you locked in a penitent engine. So I remain silent. I am a statue of holy wrath, an icon of faith for men like him. My silence is my final, bitter confession. I have become a part of the lie, and in that acceptance, I find a strange, horrifying kind of peace, the peace of a cog that has finally accepted its place in the machine. The war for Cadian's Gate ends, as all wars do. In a wasteland of ash and bone, we have won. The forces of chaos are routed. The planet is secured. A victory for the Imperium. For me, it is just a pause, a comma in a sentence of unending violence. I stand on the edge of a great victory parade, hidden away in a side alley, too terrible a sight for the celebrations. I watch the columns of victorious guardsmen, the banners held high, the priests chanting their thanks to the Emperor. They are celebrating a truth, a victory. But I am a monument to the lie that underpins it all. I am the dark secret of the Imperium, the necessary evil, the sin that makes their righteousness possible. My existence is the final, unanswerable argument against the purity of their cause, and yet they need me. They cheer for the Emperor, but it was my fire, my saws, my agony that helped purchase this victory. I am the monster in their fairy tale, the one that slays the other, worse monsters so the heroes can live happily ever after, but the monster doesn't get a happy ending. The monster just gets sent to the next story. My new orders arrive, a stream of cold data into my cortex. Report to the orbital docks. A new transport is waiting. A new war has erupted in the Segmentum Pacificus. The cycle begins again. As I turn to limp towards the docks, a piece of paper, a windswept scrap from the celebration, blows against my leg. I look down. My auger lenses scan the text. It is a page from a cheap, mass-produced devotional pamphlet, the kind they give to the soldiers. It tells a story. The story of Saint Estella, the holy martyr who, through her faith, defeated a daemon host on a world 5,000 years ago, sanctifying it for the Imperium. The story is beautiful. It is inspiring. It is a perfect, shining lie. And in the corner of the page, in small, almost unreadable print, is the official, ecclesiarchy-approved date of the event, 343, M36. The record has been corrected. The truth I discovered has been completely and utterly erased from the galaxy. It now exists only in my memory, a memory trapped inside a machine of war. I, Kalen Vor, am the last archive. The last living record of a truth that no longer exists, and that, I realize, is my true sentence. It is not the pain, it is not the slaughter. It is to be the sole keeper of a fact that can never be told, a truth that has been rendered meaningless. I am a library of one, and my doors are forever closed. I crush the pamphlet under my massive metal foot, grinding it into the mud and ash. It doesn't matter. None of it matters. There is only the sin, the fire, and the forgiveness I will never receive. I limp towards the waiting transport, my next war, my next act of penance for a crime that officially never happened. I am a ghost in a machine, haunted by a truth that is no longer true, and I am, at last, completely and utterly alone.